welcome back to another episode of International Immersion, a podcast where we seek to capture different people, places, ideas, and events and present them in an environment where people can learn about the world around them and the interesting people that make up the planet as well. For today's episode, I have a very special guest on. He's been involved in the music industry both in the U.S. and overseas, and their band and what they've done is quite interesting. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity to talk with him today about what they've been able to do in the previous decades. And Terry, it's great to have you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on here.
So to begin with, so if you want, maybe you could give us a little introduction about the current band you're in, where you guys, how it originated, and some of the other gentlemen that you perform with.
Right. Yeah, well, I got involved with a band called the Byrds from back in the '60s, and I was not an original member. But when a couple of those original members reformed in the '80s, was when I became involved with Michael Clark and Gene Clark. They were two original members, so I toured with that reformed group for a few years. And then in 1993, I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, and that was when I started to reform the group as the Bird Celebration. Gene Clark and Michael Clark had both passed away by that time, and Skip Batten and I formed the group, the Bird Celebration. And so when Skip Batten went back to his old bandmate, Gene Parsons, that was part of the group, the Byrds, when Skip was involved, and then I brought in Scott Nienhaus, who was introduced to me from a mutual friend, Soup Granda from the Ozark Mountain Daredevils, who had also worked with me and the Byrds. And so anyway, that's sort of where Scott and I started to work together at that time, and we almost immediately flew over to Europe after a couple of weeks of rehearsal, and toured through Germany and France and some in Italy, and ended up in Holland, several shows in Holland, and then finally Amsterdam on that particular tour. It was, and we actually were supposed to have, the tour was supposed to be twice as long. Once we arrived in Amsterdam and played that last show, we were supposed to then go to join with another promoter and tour in other parts of Europe for another month or so. But by the time we arrived in Amsterdam, that second promoter had absconded the country with everyone's money from that second half of the tour.
Oh, no.
So suddenly that part of the tour was canceled. So our hosts in Amsterdam, explained it all to us and said, well, we can take all your plane tickets and passports and go to the airport and see if we can change your return tickets for an earlier date, since you've obviously gotten this second part of the tour canceled. So when they returned from that meeting, they said, we have good news and bad news. We were able to change all of the tickets to be able to return to America tomorrow, except for one ticket. So one of you has to stay around until the actual return date on the ticket, which was 2 weeks from then. And so I volunteered to stay and let everybody else go back home. As I said earlier, if I have an opportunity to stick around, I'm going to take it. So that was my first introduction to Europe that time, and it was just a great place to be, and to just get saturated into that whole environment there in Amsterdam.
No, I'm sure that had to be a very interesting experience, and that's kind of neat how you guys kind of progressed. Coming out from the very famous band, which the Byrds are, and then kind of working with some of those members, and then kind of creating that tribute band to what you guys have now, and
Right.
then I think that's very interesting, and not to mention being able to have the opportunity to go overseas and share that music with people who were interested in it over there. So.
Right.
So right now you guys are based here in the St. Louis area in the U.S.
That's correct.
And so what else can you tell us a little bit about the band and some of the other types of music you guys kind of include now? Since I know that you guys you play with the Byrds, but I know you also kind of go into other genres as well.
Sure. Well, we're also songwriters, of course. In fact, when I joined, got involved with the Birds, that was part of the understanding that I had with the organization was that I would join the group as long as they would allow me to also perform some of my original music in the shows, along with Bird's classic material, which was, I didn't want to just give up my own career by joining the Birds, and so it seemed to be a good compromise at that point.
No, of course that makes total sense. It's like it's take an opportunity, but at the same time, you don't want to give up on things or something you've worked hard on.
Right. So then when Scott and I started to work together, by the time we returned home after that first tour of Europe, it was shortly after that we went into the studio in St. Louis and recorded our first CD as the Rogers and Nienhuis Band, featuring Skip Batten. And of course, that was all original material, new original material on that CD. And so, we've toured with that for quite a while. And then we also formed a group called the Real Macaws with Soup Granda from the Ozark Mountain Daredevils. That was kind of just a fun project to do on the side when Soup wasn't out touring with the Daredevils or we weren't out touring with the Birds Celebration. So we recorded a CD with that group also in St. Louis in the early, I think it was 2011 or something like that. And so we do a few shows with that group every year. We also have a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young tribute band. It's a large ensemble, about an 8-piece group, and which is just a ton of fun. That's great music to be able to perform, and we do a great job of it, if I say so myself. So yeah, we're having a lot of fun. In this St. Louis area, the Midwest is very, very supportive of live music. Actually, more so than any other place I've lived, including Nashville, Tennessee, and my hometown of Macon, Georgia.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. That's interesting. I mean, I'm glad to hear that since I'm from the Midwest too. But that's interesting.
Yeah, it's really it was one of the things that hit me the most after moving to this area. It was just kind of mind blowing. I mean, every area of the country supports music, but it's much more so in the Midwest. I can't say it enough.
Oh, that's very interesting to know, and I did not realize that. But I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear that, and glad that my home region is good at doing that. So that's a plus. But that's also really neat that you guys have been able to kind of you did the thing with the Birds, you did with the Ozark Mountain Daredevils, the CSM Crosby, Stills and Nash tribute. So you guys kind of meddled in different things, and you collaborated with several other different bands to kind of create content. But at the same time, also carrying on your own project to say.
Right. Yeah. Our own original music is very reminiscent of those groups that we've just mentioned. Because we do our stuff is very harmony based and oriented, and so it works well together.
Oh, that's great, and it must be interesting, playing to an American audience versus playing to maybe a foreign audience. I mean, of course, they're going to have this different, there's not going to be too much differences in some ways, but I'm sure there are also differences in other ways, but the commonality is that everyone is still interested in the music that they're listening to.
That's true. That's true. I mean, one thing I did notice about European audiences is that they very much study the group, so they don't just like a certain band or certain music. They really study and find out who all the members are and all the history behind each one. And like for us, going over there as the Birds Celebration or the Birds with Michael Clark, we, the newer members of the group, don't expect to really have people calling out our personal names, but we're walking through the crowds and they already know everything. Hi Terry, hey Scott, and it's like it was just a little bizarre, But so they do put the time and energy into really studying and finding out all the details about who the musicians are.
That's an interesting fact, and that I think that definitely has to have give you guys a good feeling to know
Oh, sure. Yeah.
that they've put
Yeah.
the time and effort to kind of get to know who they're listening to.
Hmm. Yeah. Very interesting.
So the country. So just to kind of revisit. So you guys, this was in the 1990s when you did the European tour, correct?
Yes, I mean we between 1993 and about 2000, we were probably over in Europe about 8 or 10 times.
Oh wow. Okay. So yeah, I mean that
So
literally at least once a year between that period.
yeah, pretty much. And we had a group of promoters out of that were based out of Amsterdam that always brought us over there, and it was, and we also had a guy out of Interlaken, Switzerland, who was an American married to a Swiss girl there, who also booked a lot of tours for us over there as well. So we got to the point to where we when we traveled over there, we would usually be staying with friends in their homes as opposed to hotels and that kind of thing. So it made it a lot more fun and personal.
Oh, for sure, and not to mention just like our podcast title immersion, it gave you that added level of immersion, not just staying in a hotel, but you actually live with people, you see how they live, what they do, and just
That's
and you
right.
can build more personal connections with the people around you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's great. So the countries you visited. So can you tell us a little bit about like what you noticed, maybe at different tours, like maybe Germany versus Holland versus maybe Italy?
Yeah, I mean, the very first tour I did of Europe, the first show that I did was in Athens, Greece, and and it was pretty amazing. In the city of Athens, at one end of the city, of course, is the Acropolis, which everybody is familiar with, all of the ancient ruins and stuff on that top of the Acropolis. But on the opposite end of the city is Mount Lycopodius, and it has no ruins on it. But it has an amphitheater, a natural amphitheater built on the top of that of Mount Lycopodius. So that's where we performed, was
Oh
on
wow.
Mount Lycopodius, and we were from that vantage point on stage looking out. You're looking out over the city of Athens, and then you're seeing the Acropolis over here. You're seeing the Aegean Sea over here and the Mediterranean over here. That was a pretty mind-boggling first experience for me. That was my very first show
Oh
in
yeah, that
Europe.
talk about a first impression, and playing a place that has so much history and cultural significance.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So we were there for, I don't know, for about several days, and and then we went from there to Mallorca, Spain, for 11 days, which of course is an island off the coast of Spain, and played a couple of shows there, and it was just a beautiful situation that we had there, and so then all over Germany, and then all over England, including Scotland, that first tour, and then once following that. So basically, the countries I visited in Europe often were Greece, Germany, England, Italy, Spain, and Switzerland, uh, France a few times, and but we didn't get up into Denmark and Finland in that area, which I was a little disappointed in. But really and truly, we saw a lot of great. Every place was great. And so
No, but
I,
I mean that's a pretty good coverage of the continent, you
uh,
know. And
we were over in the Czech Republic a little bit as well, and that was just right after the wall had come down and stuff like that. So it was very interesting.
and that brings us to another good point that because at that time the EU hadn't been formed, and then you also didn't have the euro or the situation or the current state of affairs. Like when I was in Europe in 2014, that was all established. So, what was
Yeah.
it like to travel at that time before the EU, the modern state of affairs in Europe, has solidified?
Well, it was just every border was you had to know the rules, so to speak, and what to expect. And of course, traveling from say Holland, for example, on our way to Switzerland. we have to go through France, and then France, of course, at that time, and most of the countries in Europe at that time, marijuana was still illegal. Even in Holland, even though it was tolerated, it wasn't technically legal. And so it was interesting crossing over the borders from Holland into France, and they wanted us to all come and line up and empty our pockets on this low table and just put us through a bunch of crazy stuff while our Dutch tour manager just gave them all a load of crap, about, how stupid are you? How stupid are you French? What do you think? We're going to carry drugs from Holland through France to Switzerland because we get drugs for free in Holland and we get drugs for free in Switzerland? So wow, we're stupid. We're going to bring it through France, and just, it was hilarious, really, watching him just make those guys, it was funny.
So,
It was,
moral of the story is that the border checks and everything, even before 9/11 and kind of all that ramping up security, it could still be a pain.
oh, totally a pain. And you have to handle every border that you cross. It's the same routine over and over again. Collect all the passports. Make sure you're not don't have anything that you shouldn't have, and just so and then the monies, you have to change the monies, in every country, and so that, and I recognize that certainly must be a little bit more convenient now with the euro and the open borders and stuff, but I personally have not been able to experience that. So.
No, and kind of give you to compare that a little bit with what it is like when I was there. It is nice having one currency, and like when I went from Italy to the Czech Republic when I was studying in Italy, it was seamless. It was like going like almost literally from state to state here in the U.S. So it was quite nice. Now the Czech Republic still has their own currency. They don't use the euro, although when I was there they took euros. They didn't mind at all. But the one difference I think is it was definitely cheaper to travel then than it was now because the euro is on an exchange ratio higher than the dollar. So, and when I was there in 2014, it was when the euro was substantially higher than the dollar, so it was rather expensive. But the Czech Republic was awesome because it was still they still use the crowns. It was still quite cheap.
Yeah. Right. We did a show in Brussels. Well, no, actually not Brussels, Belgium. What was the city? Anyway, the event was Euro Woodstock, Budapest, Hungary. That's what I'm trying to say.
Oh wow, Budapest, Hungary.
Budapest, Hungary was where they had the event Euro Woodstock, and I guess that was around 1995, maybe, and that was very cool. And what a beautiful city that is. I mean, the event was on an island in the middle of the river.
Oh, that's cool.
And so it was just it was separated from everything else. It was, and in fact, Scott just recently found a documentary about that event online that he shared with me that actually has some footage of us playing there and a couple of my original songs and as the music of the documentary, and so that was kind of mind-boggling. And,
well, how cool is that? That had to make you guys pretty happy to see that. Like, oh wow, we were involved in that.
Right. Yeah, it was wild. That's when we first met the grandmothers, the Mothers of Invention, Frank Zappa's band. When they reformed, of course, years after Frank Zappa had passed away, their drummer Jimmy Carl Black had moved to Europe. I'm not sure what year, but he'd been living there for several years. And one day, the Mothers of Invention decided to get back together and do some touring. Frank Zappa's widow would not allow them to call themselves the Mothers of Invention. So they said, okay, we'll call ourselves the Grandmothers of Invention. But no, you can't do that. You can't say invention. So they just became the Grandmothers. And so that was the first show that we did with them over there. And then eventually, while we were all living in Nashville, Tennessee, they decided to tour America, and they all came to Nashville and rehearsed at our house. We had a band house at that time for a couple of weeks, and which was a real trip. And then we did a little touring with them and played some Frank Zappa, uh, you know, shows or tribute shows, and it was some wild times. It all started, from our travels in Europe.
Oh, that's awesome, and that's cool. You guys could go over there, and then that band could come over here into the U.S. and you guys
Yeah.
could tour
Mm-hmm.
together and support each other. That's great.
Yeah.
So like I would say, so all these places like what would be some like what would you say were what would you say was your favorite place or your favorite places? Because I know sometimes like with me I don't have a favorite place. I have favorites.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's hard to put your finger on just one, but Amsterdam certainly is at the top of the list, and Switzerland was another place that we really spent a lot of time, in particular in the Interlaken area, and and of course Italy. I've been in love with Italy since the first time I visited there, and those three places. And but then again, like you said, as you talk about it and you think about it, it's I can't think of a single place that I traveled over there that I did not like. So
Oh, I completely agree with you. Every place in Europe I've been to, I never disliked any place. That's for sure. And another cool thing I've noticed is that more recently when you guys have some of your own work, like your one album, Empty Room, which is for everyone who's listening, it's a great album. It's got some good songs. I've noticed a couple of the songs on there you guys wrote in part or to a large part based on your travel overseas.
yeah, I in particular do a lot of that type of writing, a travel log type experience. I mean, that on that record you're talking about, the Arrivederci Rome, of course, was one about the touring in Italy, and of course Amsterdam, and I have another song, Trico House, which was basically the song I wrote about after my first visit of New Orleans. And so yeah, it's a fun way to you know
No, and I
make it.
think that's a thing a lot of people don't realize is that for a person in your industry and your colleagues, you guys can capture a lot of these experiences in the songs you write, after the
Yeah,
fact. And
right.
having traveled and having listened to that album, I can definitely see where a lot of the inspiration came from, and
Hmm.
also the feel and the just the all the memories of a place, and you incorporate that within the lyrics, which is really
Right,
neat.
right. Yeah, yeah. It's definitely. I mean, uh, I'd love to do more traveling, and hopefully one day things will open up again and we can do that. But I
I'm
guess
sure
for
they will. It's just a matter of time because pandemics they inevitably will end. But given the current situation, it just has to weed itself out. Some countries have done a better job than others. I'm not going to name names, but it's just the truth
that's right.
at dealing with the virus. But I think once it's over, I think you're going to see a pretty large move of people traveling because they've been fed up and they want to get out. So
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
open the floodgates.
I guess the most recent out of the country tour that we did was we toured in Brazil a couple of times. Our one of our uh, promoters that was promoting us out of Amsterdam back in those days, I was telling you about earlier, um, is a British guy named David Osborne, and he um, prior to when we met him in Amsterdam, he had lived for several years in Brazil and was doing a lot of tours with some Jamaican artists and a lot of international artists down there. So he speaks fluent Portuguese as well as was Dutch and English and a few other languages. So he ended up bringing us down to Brazil for a couple of tours. That was very, very cool. We had a great time. I guess that was around 2014 or 2015, something like that.
That's cool. So I mean that's definitely what did you guys think of the tours in Brazil like versus Europe?
Well, they were certainly not as extensive, and and we were just one band touring down there, so that we didn't have like a bus or any of that kind of thing. We were flying to most places and then just getting small cars around the city and then flying to the next one. But it was I don't know, I loved it all, but I loved just delving into the cultures and I had I, the language that I speak best besides English is Spanish and some Italian. So the Portuguese didn't seem to be that far away from that. Communication still was relatively easy.
Yeah, there's definitely similarities between all three languages. I mean, like, yeah, to the extent it's different, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of similarities, and you can, and
Hmm.
my friends who speak Spanish, they can understand a lot of Portuguese and vice versa.
Right, right. And again, as you know, I'm sure that when you travel in other countries, for the most part, most people speak English, or at least
Yeah,
enough, for you to get by.
yeah, it definitely depends on where in the world, but if you're in the large urban centers, or like let's say in China, in Shanghai, Beijing, or Rio de Janeiro, or Rome,
Yeah,
you'll find people because those are they're internationally very diverse, and there's a lot of
right.
people from all over the world there. So, and
Yeah,
English is, in a way, you could say, is kind of the global language of business and trade. So,
yeah, right. Mm.
you know, like,
Yeah.
so and then so you guys have done a couple of tours there. So what would you say like have been some of the takeaways you've come away with from touring overseas, and doing these tours, and sharing the music you and your colleagues all love?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I think for me personally, it's just mostly that I just would prefer to live there as opposed to here. That's the most obvious takeaway that I have, and and I didn't feel like that was necessarily the case with my companions, that I was touring with. I mean, I thought that I got the feeling for the most part that most of them were really ready to get back to the States and back to their what they were used to. Um, Whereas I feel like I'm sort of the opposite of that. I find it much more intriguing and much more, no, I don't know, fascinating, inspiring, in all the ways that I am as far as a creative person. And I just, I don't know, it always makes me want to be there more when I
So
try.
you can say that the more you go, the more you get, the more you want to stay.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Would you say there's any key reason or reasons that make you want to stay? Or
Uh, I, I feel like that. Well, how can I say this in a nice way? I feel like that the intelligence factor is much higher outside of the United States. The education, the well-read parts, the higher consciousness types of thinking and everything. I find America to be a pretty stupid, uh, ignorant place to be overall. That's what I see here more than anything else. So,
there's definitely that here, and I think and I think it also is. I wouldn't say it's regionally based, but it definitely is. I think just depends on people's exposure and what they have
right.
access to, and I think that's a huge thing because you go to New York or LA. There's so many people from all the world. There's so much
That's true. That's
information to
true.
process.
I love visiting New York City, for that reason. Very diverse, for that, and certain places on the West Coast, and there certainly are differences for sure. But religion also is a big factor of the ignorance over here in America. It's religion in Europe is old enough to where it's not such a you don't find the evangelical morons, over there in Europe. And I'm obviously outspoken. I'm
No,
not
that's
real.
that's what you think. You're entitled to what you think.
I'm not very popular in political conversations around this area.
Well, I mean, the Midwest, I mean, is definitely more conservative just because of a wide range of factors that we could go on forever.
But but you have to also understand, I grew up in Georgia, which is just about as ignorant as Missouri, you know.
Yeah, I mean, like we've been saying, we could go on forever and forever on stories and thoughts.
Yes,
No, but I definitely can relate in the fact that I've met a lot of interesting people overseas, and it's always interesting to talk to them. And you hear a lot of insights, perspectives, and ways of thinking or doing things that you don't experience where you're from, and you're like, oh, I never thought about it that way, or you get
yeah,
their take on things, and then
right,
by you guys being able to tour, you guys got a good sampling of that. And like you said, some people, as with everybody, any group that goes someplace, some are going to be enamored by the place, some are going to be neutral, and some are going to be okay. I want to go home.
right, sure.
And I've seen my fair share of that as well when I've been overseas. It's like some people they can't adapt or
Right, right.
acclimate as well as others.
And that's where the term "ugly American" comes from, you know, when overseas.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is true. I mean, not all, but there are
Yeah,
definitely those Americans who travel who do hold up to that or hold up to that standard. Unfortunately,
yeah,
no, that's great. That's great, Terry. I appreciate you sharing some of these, your personal experiences, the places you've been to, and I think it's interesting, not just to travel to a place, but also being able to travel to a place and actually perform live music
right.
to those
Yeah,
people. And like you said, it was you guys were surprised by just the intelligence and the interest that the audiences that you
yeah,
performed to, showed to you guys.
yeah, yeah. And of course, you know, the wonderful places that you are able to visit when you're overseas, like the amazing museums and art galleries and stuff. I mean, there's so much of that in Europe.
No, and oh, that's the truth, and that's one thing that if you travel for business or for a purpose like you guys have done or I've done, you have to take those opportunities when you're free. Don't just stay in your hotel room. I've seen people do that, and I'm like,
That's
what a
right.
waste. It's like go out, go check out a museum, go check out this place, go check out that place. Go down to a cafe and talk to the locals, and that's I
Yeah,
think what you should do. It's like when you
that's
go
right.
somewhere, you shouldn't just be like, okay, I'm gonna go do my thing and leave. It's like, well, I'm in this place, as they say, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. I think that's a perfect analogy.
Yeah, and that's and I realized that I was lucky in many ways in terms of what I got to experience and when I was traveling overseas because there's other like a large group like say Deep Purple for example. I had a good friend of mine, Steve Morris, has been the guitarist for Deep Purple for I don't know about 25 years by now. But my best friend Scoots Linden was the guitar tech for Steve Morris, and so he was with traveled with Deep Purple, and most of their travels, they very rarely got to the United States. They were going everywhere else in the world, all the time, constantly, and so, and people would say to Scoots, man, you're so lucky. You get to travel all these amazing places. And Scoots would say, let me tell you what I get to see. I get to see airports, bus stations, venues, and hotels. That's it. I don't see the any of the sites or any of that kind of stuff. So it's like I could be. He would say I could be anywhere. It doesn't matter, But so that's what you think I'm seeing is not what I'm actually seeing.
And yeah, I mean that's a good point. It all boils down to your schedule. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're so compact that you have no space between each gig
Right.
or
Yeah.
performance, then yeah, it's literally just airports, bus stations, hotels, taxis, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my own field that I work in, yeah, international travel is a portion. So I've kind of I've encountered both the situations. Times where it's just work, 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 but then there's the times I have a couple days or I have a bit of time
Hmm.
where, and that's when you got to take full advantage of that.
That's right.
No,
Right.
that's cool. So, is there anything else you'd like to talk about, like that, or that we've not covered about any of the music you guys perform, or any places, or any other thoughts, or that you?
Well, just that the world, the changes that are going on, like all the obvious things like we've discussed, the touring has slowed down, if not stopped, basically, as far as music is concerned. But at the same time, it's opening up other areas, like this. We've been in the world of having internet to where we've got this immediate connection to where we can connect with people all over the world. Um, you know, Theoretically and technically, but before this quarantine stuff started happening, it was just kind of sporadic as far as how often you would do those things, connect with someone, in England or whatever, just by emailing them or whatever. But now with the this evolution that we're in now, those that has grown because now that's our only outlet, the internet. That's why all these Zoom meetings and Zoom videos and everything is taking place, which is just, it's just another, it's a new side of creativity, that's bringing in all these new possibilities. And, me as a songwriter and a performer, even though it's exciting. I'm finding new inspiration, and I've started doing that more, writing more and creating more during these times. So, it's just you have to find the good side of everything, of anything, and as long as we're able to do that, then we can continue to carry on and hopefully raise the consciousness of the planet at the same time.
Oh, I totally agree with you, and I think situations and periods of time like this with coronavirus, we have to find the good and the opportunity, you know, and like you
Mm-hmm.
said, use it to write more songs or use it to improve your skills or learn a new skill set. You have to don't just sit and sulk. Take
Right.
take the full advantage of that and learn what you can, and
Mm-hmm.
and like you said, use the new technology, Zoom, Skype, whatever. Use that to get more outreach, connect with people. And the nice thing is with the World Wide Web, you can connect with anyone now. It doesn't
That's
matter
right.
how far or where they're from now.
Yeah, that's right. In a strange way, I felt like it's bringing me closer together with the world. At this stage in particular.
No, and hence that's kind of the premise of this podcast that we're doing here. We're wanting to build connections and build more of a co- coherent and cohesive, connection that people can. That the world is actually not that big when you think about it. It may seem
That's
big, it
right.
may seem daunting. Oh, these people speak different languages. At the end of the day, we're all humans. We all strive for the same things,
That's
and we
exactly
need to
right.
work together.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Terry, it's been great having you today, and I appreciate all the insight and your personal experiences that you've shared with us. So, if anyone who listens to this episode, where can they go to learn more about the music you guys are you perform, and any other like social media or outlets they can access it?
Well, we certainly have a website. The uh, the website address is oneeyedparrot.com, and that's ONE-EYEDPARROT.com, oneeyedparrot.com. We have a large presence on Facebook, of course, Rogers and Neenhouse, and I guess those are probably the easiest ways to find us. I'm writing new music and putting out new music a lot. I have a new song coming out that will be ready for release, I don't know, within a couple of weeks. And so we have a YouTube channel and all of that. So if you go to YouTube, for example, and type in Rogers and Neenhouse, you will come up with all kinds of stuff. And of course, a way to subscribe to our YouTube channel. So we're out there quite a bit. We're pretty easy to find.
Oh, that's excellent. And I will say I subscribed to your channel recently, and you have some good content on there. And for the purposes of our audience, I can list all this in our podcast episode
That's great.
description, so they'll have access to it. And
Great.
having checked out several of these myself, I definitely recommend anyone to check them out because there's some really good music, and especially some of the music that involves their travel. It really does capture kind of the spirit of travel and what someone can take in from being over there, particularly as a couple of the songs that Terry here just elaborated on previously. And having traveled myself, I definitely would confirm that and would second that.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Sean, for inviting me to be part of this. And
well, thank you, and it's been a great pleasure talking to you. And for our audience, if you guys want to learn more about their work, what they do, the information will be listed in this podcast episode's description. And if you have any thoughts, suggestions, comments, ideas, go ahead and send us an email to internationalimmersionpodcast@gmail.com. We'll look over that, take those into consideration to hopefully create more content and expand upon it in the future. So until next time, this has been another episode of International Immersion, and we will see you on the next one.